Do you remember Aliens, 1986? The film pushed audiences to the edge with its brutal fight for survival, but few realized the cast would face battles far darker than anything on screen. Over the years, tragic accidents, sudden declines, and quiet, lonely deaths claimed many of them, one by one. Today, we look back to honor their stories and the legacies they never knew they were leaving behind. Bill Paxton as Private Hudson. Bill Paxton was born on May 17, 1955, in Fort Worth, Texas. At 31 years old, he played Private Hudson, the terrified yet darkly comedic Marine, in Aliens in 1986, a role that became the emotional release valve of the entire squad. His character transformed panic into humanity, making Hudson one of the film's most iconic voices. But away from the screen, Paxton's life unfolded with battles far more intimate. His first marriage to Kelly Rowan lasted barely a year, collapsing under the early chaos of a career that suddenly demanded everything. When he married Louise Newberry in 1987, he found steadiness, yet even that stability was tested as he disappeared into long productions like Apollo 13 and Titanic, leaving Louise to hold the family together. Paxton cherished his children deeply, but the rhythm of Hollywood clustered his life into absences. Health concerns grew heavier as the years passed. His congenital heart valve issue, long overlooked, tightened its grip as he continued taking physically and mentally demanding roles such as those in Big Love and Hatfields and McCoys. Yet he kept working, hoping discipline could outrun vulnerability. Finally, Paxton died on February 25, 2017, at 61 years old, following a stroke days after open-heart surgery meant to repair his failing valve. He was cremated and laid to rest at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills. His net worth of $25 million reflected decades of devotion to his craft. But what remains most deeply is the tenderness he brought to the screen. Al Matthews as Sergeant Apone. Al Matthews was born on November 21, 1942, in Brooklyn, New York. At 44 years old, he played Sergeant Apone, the seasoned, uncompromising platoon leader, in Aliens in 1986. His steady voice set the tone for the entire unit. Yet behind that command was a life marked by fractures that no uniform could hold together. Matthews married twice, though both marriages eventually ended under the strain of distance and the unstable income. His second marriage, which he hoped would anchor him, slowly unraveled as his work took him from the UK to Spain and back again, offering opportunity but little personal consistency. He wanted connection, but his life's rhythm made permanence difficult to sustain. Years of physical toll from combat and age brought illness that eroded his strength and independence. Though he continued to work, even returning as the voice of Apone in 2013, his declining health restricted travel in his final years. He moved quietly through days shaped by medication, hospital visits. Matthews died on September 22, 2018, at 75 years old, discovered in his home in Alicante, Spain, after battling severe health issues. He was cremated, closing the story of a man whose resilience carried him through war, music, film, and radio. His net worth, estimated at $1 million, represented a lifetime of scattered but heartfelt work. Paul Maxwell as Van Leeuwen. Paul Maxwell was born on November 12, 1921, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. At 65 years old, Maxwell played Van Leeuwen, the stern corporate administrator, in Aliens in 1986, a role that framed the film's cold bureaucracy against Ripley's trauma. His brief presence carried the weight of authority, setting the emotional stakes of Ripley's fight to be believed. Yet away from the screen, his life unfolded with challenges far more personal. After World War II, Maxwell married Mary Lindsay, hoping that stability would follow him into civilian life. But decades of relocating for work, from Canada to the U.S., then finally to Britain, strained their marriage until it eventually dissolved. His long stretches on stage in the West End and roles in A Bridge Too Far and Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade demanded constant movement, leaving little room for repair. By the time he reached his 60s, Maxwell lived largely alone, the emotional distance between him and his former partner growing wider than any ocean he had crossed for work. His health began to decline quietly, shaped partly by age and partly by the lingering physical toll of wartime service. Though he continued to act whenever possible, even voicing characters for Jerry Anderson's productions, each role required more strength than the last. Finally, Maxwell died on December 19, 1991, at 70 years old in London, his passing attributed to failing health linked to wartime after-effects. His estimated net worth of $500,000 reflected a career built on endurance. J. Benedict as Newt's father. J. Benedict was born on April 11, 1951, in Burbank, California. At 35 years old, Benedict played Russ Jordan, Newt's father whose discovery of the derelict ship sets the tragedy in motion, in Aliens in 1986. His role, though brief, served as the catalyst for the colony's collapse and the emotional core of Newt's loss. Off-screen, his own life moved with a similar mixture of opportunity and hardship. His first marriage to Vanessa Pereira ended as his work shifted increasingly toward Europe. The frequent travel and unstable income strained the relationship beyond repair. His second marriage to Phoebe Schofield brought new creative partnership. They built a loop group together. Yet even this stability faced pressure as he juggled theater runs, ADR work, and international filming. Even while performing in demanding stage productions and appearing in films like The Dark Knight Rises, he maintained a strong professional rhythm. But when COVID-19 swept through London in 2020, the virus turned suddenly and violently against him. His body, worn by decades of constant work and travel, could not withstand the rapid decline. The illness struck quickly, leaving no time for goodbyes. Benedict died on April 4, 2020, at 68 years old in Croydon University Hospital, a sudden loss that shook colleagues across both sides of the Atlantic. He left behind his wife, Phoebe, and his children, Alexis, Leopold, and Freddie. His estimated net worth of $1 million reflected not glamour, but decades of steady, hard-working artistry across stage, screen, and studio. Eddie Powell as Alien Warrior. Eddie Powell was born on March 9, 1927, in London, England. At 59 years old, he played the Alien Warrior, the agile, menacing creature whose movements defined the terror of aliens in 1986. His physicality gave the monster its uncanny realism, setting the tone for the film's most iconic sequences. But behind the suit was a man carrying the weight of a dangerous profession. Powell married Rosemary Burroughs in 1967, and their life together unfolded in the shadow of career risk. Long months on set, late-night rehearsals, and the constant threat of injury placed strain on a marriage that depended heavily on endurance. Rosemary, a wardrobe mistress herself, understood the industry, yet the fear of seeing him return bruised, burned, or shaken became a quiet tension that grew as he aged. The closeness they wanted often broke under the pressure of a job that demanded physical sacrifice above all else. By his 50s, accumulated stunt injuries began to catch up with him. Years of doubling for Christopher Lee, performing falls, impacts, and hazardous sequences left him with chronic pain that limited his opportunities. Productions like Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade and Batman kept him working, but each role required more from a body that had less to give. His health declined steadily, and by the late 1990s, the line between professional strain and medical concern became impossible to ignore. Finally, Powell died on August 11, 2000, at 73 years old in Berkshire, England, from complications related to heart failure. He was cremated, leaving behind a legacy carved through physical endurance and invisible injuries. His estimated net worth of $300,000 reflected decades of stunt work, dangerous, demanding, and too often overlooked. Trevor Steedman, as Private Wierzbowski. Trevor Steedman was born on May 25, 1954, in Thurrock, Essex, England. At 32 years old, he played Private Wierzbowski, the Marine whose off-screen death became one of Alien's most haunting disappearances in 1986. His brief appearance carried the panic and chaos of the Marine's first encounter with the Hive. Away from the film, his life unfolded with battles far quieter but far more personal. Steedman married, and much of their life together was shaped by the unpredictable demands of stunt work. His early career involved hazardous sequences for films like A View to a Kill and Doctor Who, and the grind of surviving in an industry built on risk pushed his marriage into periods of distance and emotional strain. He wanted to provide stability, but the nature of his work often left little room for the consistency a family needed. Health struggles soon added weight to the pressure. Years of physical stunts left him with lingering injuries, and after a major stroke in 2014, his world shifted abruptly. Recovery required strength he still tried to muster, but the frustration of limited mobility and reduced work opportunities affected both his mental and financial stability. Sadly, Steedman died on June 25, 2016, at 62 years old, following complications from a second stroke in London. He left behind a modest legacy of roles and tremendous dedication, one built through determination rather than spotlight. His estimated net worth of $200,000 reflected a lifetime of hard, physical work. Tip-tipping, as Private Crow. Tip-tipping was born on February 13, 1958, in England. At 28 years old, he played Private Crow, the quiet, steady member of the Marine Squad, in Aliens in 1986. His presence added weight to the team's early missions and helped define the film's sense of disciplined camaraderie. But the life behind that uniform was marked by choices far more dangerous than anything on screen. Tipping married once, but the relationship eventually fractured under the relentless strain of his profession. His transition from the Royal Marines and SAS into stunt work meant long weeks away, unpredictable schedules, and a constant awareness that every job carried real physical risk. The emotional distance widened as he moved from project to project, such as Never Say Never Again, Batman, Doctor Who. Health was never his struggle. Risk was. Years of high-intensity stunt work, parachuting, combat sequences, hazardous falls, built a life fueled by adrenaline but shadowed by the knowledge that one mistake could end everything. And for Tipping, that line proved heartbreakingly thin. During the filming of a reconstruction for the BBC series 999, a parachute that should have opened simply didn't. All the training, all the discipline could not stop the tragedy that unfolded in seconds. Tipping died on February 5, 1993, at just 34 years old, after the parachuting accident near Brunton, Northumberland. He was laid to rest in the churchyard of St. Peter and St. Paul in Wadhurst, East Sussex. His estimated net worth of $100,000 reflected a career cut painfully short, leaving behind the memory of a performer whose courage far outlived his time. Sigourney Weaver, as Ellen Ripley. Sigourney Weaver was born on October 8, 1949, in Manhattan, New York. At 37 years old, she played Ellen Ripley, the hardened survivor whose resolve anchors the entire Marine mission, in Aliens in 1986. The role reshaped the future of action cinema. It also pushed Weaver into an international spotlight that would define her next decades. Marriage to theater director Jim Simpson grounded her life, but balancing the demands of global franchises with family proved far more difficult than audiences ever saw. While working on Ghostbusters, Working Girl, and later Avatar, months of filming overseas left her returning home only to pack another suitcase. She has spoken about the ache of watching her daughter grow up through phone calls. Fame brought admiration, but it also carved quiet loneliness into the spaces between projects. As her career widened, From Oscar-nominated performances in Aliens and Gorillas in the Mist to acclaimed turns in The Ice Storm and The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart, the emotional toll of constant reinvention weighed heavily. Height, once a source of rejection early in her career, lingered in her mind longer than she let on, resurfacing whenever a role demanded she shrink herself to fit someone else's vision. In 2025, Weaver is 76 years old, still working, still commanding the screen, and still choosing roles that challenge both audiences and herself. She divides her time between acting, stage work, and mentoring, while her long-standing partnership with Jim Simpson remains one of Hollywood's rare, stable unions. Her estimated net worth of $60 million reflects a lifetime built on characters that reshaped what strength looks like. Lance Henrikson as Bishop. Lance Henrikson was born on May 5, 1940, in Manhattan, New York. At 46 years old, he played Bishop, the quiet, unnervingly gentle android whose loyalty becomes the squad's last defense, in Aliens in 1986. His performance gave the franchise its first machine capable of compassion. From that moment, audiences saw him as the soul hidden inside steel. But the stillness he brought to Bishop contrasted sharply with the turbulence of his personal life. Henrikson married Mary Jane Evans in 1985, yet the pressures of rebuilding a career that had only recently begun gaining traction strained the partnership. Long production days on films like Near Dark and The Right Stuff kept him away for months, creating emotional gaps the marriage could not withstand. His second marriage to Jane Pollock years later brought comfort but also familiar cracks. Competing schedules, rising expectations, and the quiet exhaustion of two artists trying to hold a shared life together. Years of unpredictable roles, stretches of unemployment, and the emotional residue of portraying wounded men left their mark. Even during the success of Millennium, the weight of carrying a series built around darkness forced him into periods of withdrawal, testing the resilience of anyone close to him. Through it all, he continued working. Today, Henrikson is 85 years old, still active, lending his voice, presence, and intensity to films and games. His world now revolves around his art and his children, a quieter life shaped by reflection rather than chaos. His estimated net worth of $5 million represents decades of relentless work, carving out a legacy from roles that demanded every part of him. Michael Biehn as Corporal Hicks. Michael Biehn was born on July 31, 1956, in Anniston, Alabama. At 30 years old, he played Corporal Hicks, the steady, instinctive Marine who becomes Ripley's final human ally, in Aliens in 1986. His calm authority shaped the emotional backbone of the surviving squad, turning Hicks into one of the franchise's most grounded figures. But behind that controlled performance was an actor entering a decade that would test every part of his life. Biehn's first marriage to Carleen Olsen began just as his career was rising, but the constant pressure of The Terminator, Aliens, and later The Abyss pulled him from home more often than he could repair the distance. The emotional fallout of their divorce lingered into his second marriage to Gina Marsh. Even as he worked on acclaimed roles, the strain of long shoots, publicity demands, and a restless, uneven Hollywood path made stability difficult. Projects like Tombstone and The Rock brought recognition but also deep fatigue. Health complications arrived quietly, but hit hard. A stroke and later open-heart surgery forced Biehn to confront the fragile limits of a career built on intensity. During this period, he retreated from major studio films, choosing small, independent projects or voice work simply because they allowed him to stay closer to home. His marriage to actress Jennifer Blanc brought a steadier chapter, but even then, the shadows of earlier losses and the unpredictable rhythm of Hollywood shaped every decision he made. Now, Biehn is 69 years old and continues to work selectively, focusing on passion projects, voice performances, and occasional franchise returns. He lives a quieter life centered on his family, far from the tumult that once defined his career. His estimated net worth of $4 million reflects decades of dedication to roles that shaped the sci-fi landscape. Paul Reiser as Carter Burke. Paul Reiser was born on March 30th, 1957, in New York City. At 29 years old, he played Carter Burke, the soft-spoken corporate liaison whose greed quietly destroys a colony, in Aliens in 1986. His performance gave the film one of its most human villains. But away from the screen, Reiser was building a life that demanded a very different kind of balance. Reiser married Paula Ravitz in 1988, just as Mad About You was turning him into one of television's most recognizable comedic voices. The success brought awards, fame, and relentless schedules that often left his family waiting at home. When their older son was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, the emotional weight shifted further, and Reiser carried the guilt of dividing himself between career obligations and the needs within his own household. That pressure quietly shaped his choices, including the struggle to transition between comedy and more dramatic work like Whiplash. The contrast between the lightness he projected on screen and the heaviness he managed privately created long stretches of uncertainty. While Stranger Things and late career roles brought renewed acclaim, they also reopened the familiar tension of leaving home for extended shoots. Reiser has spoken openly about how the effort to stay present for his family often came at the cost of opportunities others might have chased. Today, Reiser is 68 years old and maintains a steady rhythm of acting, writing, and producing that allows him to stay anchored to the people he once feared losing to the pace of his work. His long marriage to Paula Ravitz endures, strengthened by years of navigating hardship together. His estimated net worth of $75 million reflects a career built on resilience, reinvention, and the quiet determination to protect a family shaped by both triumph and challenge. Janette Goldstein as Private Vasquez. Janette Goldstein was born on February 4, 1960, in Los Angeles, California. At 26 years old, she played Private Vasquez, the relentless smart gunner whose toughness redefined female action roles, in Aliens in 1986. The character became the film's unexpected emotional core. Yet behind that iconic armor was a young actress stepping into a world that often didn't know where to place her. Her marriage unfolded during the years when Hollywood kept trying to box her into stereotypes created by her own success, while roles in Terminator 2 and Titanic proved her range, the industry's rigid expectations for women placed strain on both her career choices and her home life. As she navigated long shoots, raising her son as a single mother for stretches of time became its own battle, leaving little room for rest. The emotional cost of balancing motherhood with an industry built on appearance and typecasting grew heavier over time. Goldstein often found herself fighting not for roles, but for the freedom to exist beyond the tough exterior Vasquez had etched into public memory. This struggle pushed her toward a different kind of creativity. Today, Goldstein is 65 years old and runs her successful specialty lingerie business, a company born from her desire to support women with bodies the fashion world often ignores. Her estimated net worth of $5 million reflects both her acting legacy and her second life as an entrepreneur who learned to rewrite her own story. William Hope as Lieutenant Gorman. William Hope was born on March 2, 1955, in Montreal, Canada. At 31 years old, he played Lieutenant Gorman, the inexperienced officer whose hesitation shapes the Marines' disastrous first encounter, in Aliens in 1986. His performance turned a rigid military role into a portrait of fear, responsibility, and redemption. What audiences didn't see was the personal cost of a life spent far from home. Hope's move from Canada to the United Kingdom brought opportunity, but it also introduced cultural tension that seeped into his earliest relationships. A growing career in British theater and film meant constant travel, unpredictable work, and long periods spent adjusting to a country that wasn't yet home. These pressures weighed heavily on his marriage, which struggled under the strain of distance, unfamiliar rhythms, and the demands of a profession built on instability. Even as voice acting in Thomas and Friends and roles in films like Hellbound, Hellraiser 2 brought consistency. The industry's tendency to limit him to supporting parts left an emotional imprint. Yet he found stability in the quiet discipline of voice work, a space that allowed him to rebuild without the scrutiny of the spotlight. Today, Hope is 70 years old and continues to work regularly in film, television, and voice acting from his longtime home in England. His life now reflects a balance he fought years to secure, choosing projects that allow him to stay grounded rather than uprooted. His estimated net worth of $2 million represents a steady career shaped by resilience. Carrie Hen as Newt. Carrie Hen was born on May 7, 1976, in Panama City, Florida. At 10 years old, she played Newt, the traumatized survivor whose bond with Ripley becomes the heart of Aliens, in 1986. Her instinctive, haunting performance carried a weight far beyond her age, turning Newt into the emotional spine of the film. But for Carrie, that sudden burst of fame marked not a beginning, but an ending. As the attention around Aliens grew, the pressure of being known worldwide before adolescence placed strain on her closest relationships. She felt the confusion of trying to return to an ordinary life after standing beside Sigourney Weaver on a global stage. The spotlight followed her into school, into friendships, and eventually into early adulthood. Choosing education over Hollywood brought relief, but also grief. As she earned her degree and began teaching, she encountered the strange quiet that comes after walking away from a path everyone assumed she would continue. There were moments when nostalgia tugged, invitations to reunions, letters from Weaver, lingering curiosity from fans. But stepping back into the industry would have reopened wounds she had carefully closed. Motherhood deepened this divide, revealing how fiercely she wanted a life defined not by fame, but by stability. Now Carrie Hen is 49 years old, living a grounded life far from the cameras, devoted to her family and her work in education. Her estimated net worth of $1 million comes almost entirely from the single role that changed her life, a reminder of a childhood defined by both wonder and overwhelming expectation. And though she left Hollywood behind, Newt remains a part of her story with peace. In the end, their stories remind us that even the toughest Marines and the fiercest survivors were played by people carrying battles of their own. Some won, many lost too soon. Which of these tragedies shocked you the most, and whose story do you believe deserves to be remembered louder? If you want more hidden truths, more untold endings, and more lives uncovered behind the films we love, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell us whose journey we should reveal next.